Sarah, please pick up the phone. The bank just gave us 72 hours. We need $500,000 or we are going to lose everything. Please, Sarah, we're your family. If you heard that desperate voicemail, you'd probably feel sorry for the helpless mother who left it. But you don't know what that exact same voice sounded like just 7 days ago, exactly 1 week earlier. I took an 11-hour flight and spent thousands of dollars to attend our family's prestigious annual charity gala. After receiving a handwritten invitation from my mother, I genuinely thought they had finally accepted me back into the family. But as I stood in the center of that crystal-lit ballroom, surrounded by 300 of the city's most powerful donors and VIP guests, my mother walked up to the microphone and pointed directly at me. She didn't smile. She looked at me with absolute disgust and said into the microphone, "You are not entitled to use our family name anymore to climb the social ladder. Security, please escort this woman out. She is no longer part of this family." I was marched out of that ballroom like a common criminal in front of 300 people, while my family stood there, laughing and sipping champagne. I promised myself that night I would never let them hurt me again. And yet, exactly 7 days later, that very same mother called me, begging like a beggar for $500,000. They had secretly been stealing from their own charity, and now their luxurious, fake world was collapsing. They thought because I was successful, they could just emotionally blackmail me into handing them a $500,000 blank check. But there was one terrifying secret my family didn't know. They had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living. They didn't know that 3 days ago, my private equity firm officially purchased their toxic debt from the bank. I didn't just have the $500,000 they were begging for. I literally owned their entire financial existence. And they had just unknowingly walked straight into a trap that was going to destroy their arrogance forever. I know you want to see exactly what happened when they realized who held the keys to their survival. And I trust that you will stay with me and watch this story until the very end. Before we dive in, I have a quick request. If you're watching on YouTube, please show some love and subscribe to this small channel. If you're on Facebook, hit that follow button and stay by my side. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by the people who were supposed to love you? Tell me in the comments below. So, without further ado, let's rewind the clock 7 days and begin the story. My name is Sarah, and to understand how I ended up holding my family's entire financial existence in the palm of my hand, you first have to understand why I ran away from them in the first place. I grew up in a world of old money. My family wasn't just wealthy. They were obsessed with status, reputation, and public image. To my parents, you weren't measured by your kindness or your character. You were measured by who you knew, what designer brand you wore, and whose name was on your wedding invitation. But I never fit into that perfect, shiny little box. I didn't want to marry a rich man just to merge 2 bank accounts. I wanted to build my own life. So, 5 years ago, I packed my bags, moved 3,000 miles across the country, and started my own financial firm from absolute scratch. When I left, my parents didn't cry. They didn't hug me. My mother just looked at me and said, "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to fund your little rebellion." For 5 years, it was radio silence. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards. I was officially the black sheep of the family. But let me ask you something. And I want you to answer this honestly in your own heart. No matter how old you get, no matter how successful or independent you become, do you ever really stop wanting your parents to just be proud of you? Do you ever stop craving that basic human need to just belong to a family? I didn't. Despite everything they did to me, a small, foolish part of my heart still missed them. And then, out of nowhere, an envelope arrived in my mail. It was a heavy, gold-embossed envelope. Inside was a VIP invitation to the prestigious annual Carter Family Charity Gala. My heart skipped a beat. But what really made my breath catch in my throat was a small, handwritten sticky note attached to the back of the card. It was my mother's handwriting. It said, "Sarah, it's been too long. Please come home." I literally burst into tears sitting in my office. I thought, this is it. They finally miss me. They realize that 5 years is too long to go without seeing their daughter. I thought the war was finally over. I immediately booked a first-class ticket for an 11-hour flight back to my hometown. I went to a high-end boutique and spent over $3,000 on a stunning designer evening gown. I didn't even care about the money. I just wanted to walk into that ballroom and prove to them that I was worthy of standing next to them. I wanted to look perfect so they wouldn't have a single reason to be embarrassed by me. During that entire 11-hour flight, I couldn't sleep. I just stared out the airplane window, watching the clouds, practicing what I would say to my mother when I finally hugged her again. I was so incredibly nervous, but for the first time in 5 years, I was happy. When the plane finally touched down on the tarmac, I turned off airplane mode on my phone. Instantly, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my mother. I smiled, expecting her to ask if my flight landed safely. But the text was short, cold, and strangely specific. It read, "Glad you made it. Please come to the gala alone tonight. We need to talk." I stared at the screen. We need to talk. My naive, hopeful brain convinced me that she meant we needed to have a heart-to-heart conversation to heal our relationship. I smiled, grabbed my luggage, and headed to the hotel to get ready. I had absolutely no idea that I wasn't walking into a family reunion. I was walking straight into a slaughterhouse. When my Uber pulled up to the entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel that evening, my hands were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my purse. The venue was absolutely breathtaking. There was a red carpet leading up to the grand double doors, valet drivers rushing around in crisp uniforms, and local photographers snapping pictures of the city's elite. I stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and smoothed out my dress. For the first time in 5 years, I actually felt like I belonged in this world. I walked into the massive ballroom, and the sheer scale of the wealth in that room hit me like a wave. There were towering crystal chandeliers, waiters walking around with silver trays of champagne, and over 300 guests wearing diamonds that probably cost more than a house. I grabbed a glass of champagne and started scanning the room for my family. The first person I saw was my older sister, Jessica. Jessica was the golden child, the one who married a wealthy hedge fund manager and did exactly what my parents told her to do. I walked up to her, a genuine smile on my face. "Jessica, it's so good to see you," I said. She turned around. She didn't hug me. She just slowly looked me up and down, her eyes pausing on my designer gown. She gave me this tight, plastic smile. "Sarah," she said, keeping her voice low so the other guests wouldn't hear. "You actually came. I'm surprised they let you in the door. Is that dress rented? Or did you finally find a guy to pay for your lifestyle?" Let me pause here for a second. Have you ever been in a situation where someone insults you so subtly, so smoothly, that you almost don't know how to react? My chest tightened, but I forced myself to swallow my pride. I wasn't going to let her ruin this night for me. "I bought it myself, Jess. It's nice to see you too." I walked away from her before she could say anything else. I told myself she was just being her usual bitter self. I wasn't there for her anyway. I was there for my parents. A few minutes later, I spotted my father. He was standing near the center stage, laughing and shaking hands with a group of wealthy donors. My heart started beating faster. I walked up, waiting for a break in the conversation, and stepped forward. "Hi, Dad," I whispered. My father stopped laughing. He looked at me. His eyes were completely blank. No anger, no joy, just absolute indifference. He gave me a stiff, 2-second nod, turned his back to me, and went right back to talking to the donors as if I didn't even exist. The rejection stung. It felt like a physical slap to the face. I stood there awkwardly for a moment, gripping my champagne glass so tightly my knuckles turned white. Why was I here? If my sister was going to insult me and my father was going to ignore me, why did they even send me an invitation? I actually turned around, ready to walk straight out the front doors and head back to the airport. But then I heard her voice. "Sarah, darling!" I turned back around. It was my mother. She was walking toward me in a stunning diamond-encrusted evening gown. And to my absolute shock, she had her arms wide open. She walked right up to me and pulled me into a tight hug. She smelled like expensive perfume and roses, just like I remembered from my childhood. For 5 years, I had dreamed of this exact moment. I closed my eyes and hugged her back, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I missed you." She pulled back, holding me by the shoulders. She had this bright, warm smile on her face. "I am so glad you came, Sarah," she said softly. "You look absolutely beautiful. I know things have been hard between us, but tonight is going to change everything." She gently squeezed my arms and looked toward the stage. "In about 20 minutes, I'm going to go up on that stage to give the keynote speech for the charity," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with an emotion I couldn't quite figure out. "I have a very special announcement to make, and I want you standing right in the middle of the room when I do. Promise me you won't leave?" I wiped the tear from my eye and smiled back at her. "I promise, Mom. I'll be right here." She gave me one last squeeze and walked away to mingle with the guests. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever ignored massive red flags just because you wanted to be loved?" My father ignored me. My sister insulted me. But because my mother gave me one fake hug and a warm smile, I completely blinded myself to the truth. I took a sip of my champagne, looking around the beautiful ballroom. My heart felt light. Maybe I was wrong about them, I thought to myself. Maybe tonight really is the start of a new chapter for our family. But I was so incredibly naive. I had absolutely no idea that my mother's special announcement wasn't a family reunion. It was going to be my public execution. For the next 20 minutes, I stood near the center of the ballroom, just like my mother had asked me to. I watched the room buzz with energy. If you have never been to an elite, high society charity gala, let me explain how they actually work. These events aren't really about helping people in need. They are about feeding egos. The charity my parents ran was called the Carter Foundation for the Underprivileged. Every year, they hosted this massive gala to raise money for struggling families and homeless shelters in the city. The donors in the room were writing checks for $10, $20, even $50,000, just so their names would be printed in gold letters on the foundation's annual brochure. My parents loved this event. They loved standing in front of cameras, acting like generous, humble philanthropists who cared deeply about the poor. But I knew the truth. I knew what happened behind closed doors. I grew up listening to my father mock the very people he claimed to help. I remember him sitting at our dining table, drinking scotch, complaining that poor people were just lazy and looking for handouts. My family didn't run this charity out of the kindness of their hearts. They ran it because it gave them immense social power, massive tax write-offs, and untouchable prestige in the community. As I stood there watching them mingle, I couldn't help but feel a sudden knot in my stomach. I watched my father shaking hands with a local politician, laughing loudly. But his laugh looked forced. I noticed he was sweating slightly, despite the cool air conditioning in the ballroom. And my mother? She kept checking her phone every few minutes with this panicked, desperate look in her eyes before quickly putting her fake smile back on. I'm an investment banker. I analyze body language and financial stress for a living. And looking at my parents, I suddenly realized something was wrong. Very wrong. They didn't look like powerful philanthropists tonight. They looked like cornered animals trying to put on a show. But before I could think too much about it, the lights in the ballroom began to dim. A spotlight hit the center stage. The chatter in the room instantly died down, and a soft instrumental music began playing through the speakers. My father walked up to the microphone. He tapped it twice, clearing his throat, and the crowd broke into polite applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his voice booming across the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight. The Carter Foundation has always believed in one core principle: family. We believe that when you have wealth, it is your duty to extend your hand and pull up those who have nothing. Tonight, we celebrate generosity. We celebrate legacy." The crowd clapped again. It was a beautiful speech. It was perfectly rehearsed. It was completely fake. "And now," my father continued, gesturing toward the side of the stage, "I would like to introduce the woman who makes all of this possible. the heart and soul of the Carter family, my wife. The crowd erupted in applause as my mother walked onto the stage. She looked absolutely radiant under the spotlight. She took the microphone from my father, smiled warmly at the audience, and waited for the clapping to stop. I was standing right in the middle of the room, looking up at her. My heart started to race again. This was it. This was the moment she was going to make her special announcement. I smiled, ready for her to call my name, ready to finally feel like a daughter again. My mother looked out into the crowd. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed directly on me. She stared at me for 3 long, agonizing seconds. The warm smile on her face slowly disappeared, replaced by a cold, hard, unreadable expression. "Tonight, we talk about family," my mother said into the microphone. Her voice wasn't warm anymore. It was sharp, piercing. "But sometimes," she continued, her eyes locked dead onto mine, "family is a privilege that must be earned. And unfortunately, there are some people in this world who believe they can abandon their family, turn their backs on their legacy, and then simply walk back into our lives when it is convenient for them." My smile vanished. The knot in my stomach turned into a block of ice. The people standing around me started shifting uncomfortably. They noticed that my mother was staring directly at me. A few heads turned in my direction. "What is she doing?" I thought to myself, panic rising in my chest. "Mom, please, don't do this." But she wasn't stopping. She gripped the microphone tighter. "Some people," my mother said, raising her voice so it echoed off the crystal chandeliers, "come back into your life only when they want something. They smell the money. They want the prestige. But I stand before you today to protect the integrity of the Carter name." She raised her hand and pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger straight at my face. In front of 300 of the most powerful people in the city, the silence was deafening. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like lead. And then she delivered the sentence that would destroy my life as I knew it, and set the stage for the most brutal revenge of my entire existence. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a nightmare where you try to scream, but no sound comes out? You just stand there, completely paralyzed, watching the worst possible thing happen to you in slow motion? That is exactly how I felt standing in the middle of that ballroom. My mother's finger was pointed directly at my face. 300 pairs of eyes. CEOs, politicians, high society elites were all staring at me. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like it was crushing my lungs. "Sarah," my mother said into the microphone, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You are not entitled to use our family name anymore to climb the social ladder. You walked away from us 5 years ago. You do not get to come back here tonight, put on a fancy dress, and pretend you belong in this room." My mind completely blanked. I was shaking so violently that my champagne glass was trembling in my hand. "Mom," I whispered. My voice broke. I knew she couldn't hear me from the stage, but I couldn't stop the tears from filling my eyes. "Mom, you invited me. You left a note. You told me to come." I looked at my father, begging him silently to stop this. But he was just standing behind my mother, his arms crossed, watching me with a cold, dead expression. I looked to the side and saw my sister, Jessica. She was hiding behind a group of donors, but I could clearly see the nasty, victorious smirk on her face. They had planned this, every single part of it. The invitation, the handwritten note, the fake hug my mother gave me when I walked in. They orchestrated this entire night just to lure me into a room full of the most powerful people in the city so they could publicly execute my reputation. Why? Because I had dared to leave them. Because I had dared to build a life without their money. To them, my independence was an insult. And this was their punishment. My mother lowered her hand, looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had wandered into a palace. "Security," my mother ordered, her voice booming through the speakers. "Please escort this woman off the premises immediately. She is trespassing." A collective gasp went through the crowd. People were whispering, covering their mouths, staring at me with a mixture of shock and pity. Suddenly, I felt two heavy hands grab my arms from behind. I turned my head and saw two massive security guards in black suits. One of them gripped my elbow tightly. "Ma'am, you need to leave right now," he said in a low, stern voice. "I can walk myself," I choked out, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, ruining my makeup. I tried to pull my arm away, but the guard tightened his grip, completely humiliating me in front of the entire crowd. They didn't let me walk. They physically marched me through the center of the ballroom. I had to walk past the wealthy donors, past the politicians, past the people I used to know. I saw them whispering. I heard a woman in the front row say, "How embarrassing for the Carters to deal with such a pathetic daughter." I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't scream. I just kept my eyes glued to the floor as the guards dragged me toward the grand exit doors. But right before they pushed me out of the ballroom, I stopped. I planted my feet firmly on the carpet, ripped my arm out of the guard's grip, and turned around to look at the stage one last time. My mother was smiling at the crowd, ready to resume her charity speech. My father looked relieved. My sister was taking a sip of her champagne. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had buried the black sheep of the family so deep that I would never, ever show my face in this city again. I looked at them, and something inside of me permanently snapped. The sadness, the tears, the desperate little girl who just wanted her mother to hug her. She completely died right there on that red carpet. And a very cold, very dangerous woman took her place. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked out the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the freezing night air. As I stood on the sidewalk, waiting for my Uber to take me back to the airport, I wiped the ruined mascara from my eyes. I wasn't shaking anymore. My heartbeat was completely steady. I pulled out my phone and deleted my mother's contact. I deleted my father's contact. I blocked my sister's number. "Enjoy your gala, Mom," I whispered to the empty street, "because it's the last one you'll ever have." I got into the car and headed straight to the airport for an 11-hour flight back home. I thought I would never speak to those monsters again, but I had absolutely no idea that exactly 7 days later, the phone I had just silenced was going to ring, and the voice on the other end was going to beg me for mercy. Let me tell you something about taking an 11-hour flight after your entire life has just been shattered. It is a very strange, very isolating experience. You are sitting 30,000 feet in the air, surrounded by hundreds of strangers sleeping or watching movies, and you are entirely alone with your own thoughts. There is nowhere to run. There is no distraction. It's just you and the replay button in your brain. For the first 2 hours of that flight, I cried. I pressed my forehead against the cold airplane window, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and wept until my chest ached. I cried for the $3,000 dress I was still wearing, which now felt like a straitjacket. I cried for the little girl inside me who had actually believed that her mother's handwritten note was real. But most of all, I cried because I finally realized the brutal truth. My family was never going to love me, not the way a family is supposed to. To them, love was a transaction. You only received it if you played by their rules, married who they told you to marry, and bowed down to their money. Because I chose to build my own wealth, I was a threat. And they had to eliminate that threat in the most public, humiliating way possible. Around the 3rd hour of the flight, the tears stopped. My eyes were completely dry. I went to the tiny airplane bathroom, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a wreck. But beneath the smeared makeup and red eyes, I saw something else. I saw clarity. Have you ever experienced that moment of absolute clarity? It usually happens right after your heart has been completely broken. It's the moment you realize that holding on to toxic people is like holding on to a burning piece of coal, hoping it will somehow keep you warm. The only thing it does is burn you alive. I walked back to my seat. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the airplane's Wi-Fi, and opened my work files. For the next 8 hours, I didn't sleep a single wink. I worked. I dove deep into the financial portfolios of my private equity firm. For the past 5 years, I had quietly built one of the most aggressive and successful financial firms in the country. We specialized in distressed assets, buying up toxic loans from banks, restructuring failing companies, and turning them around. My parents didn't know this, of course. To them, I was just a runaway daughter playing business in another state. They had absolutely no idea how much power I actually wielded. As I scrolled through the spreadsheets, a thought crossed my mind. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to my family. I had flown 3,000 miles just to seek their approval. But as I looked at the multi-million-dollar portfolios on my screen, I realized something profound. I didn't need their approval. I was the one holding the power. By the time the plane touched down in my city, the sun was just starting to rise. The golden morning light spilled through the airplane windows, hitting my face. I closed my laptop and packed it away. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt lighter. I felt untouchable. I walked out of the airport, got into my car, and drove back to my life. I went straight to my office, threw myself back into my work, and completely erased the Carter family from my mind. I changed my number. I instructed my secretary to block any emails coming from their domains. As far as I was concerned, they were dead to me. I thought the chapter was permanently closed. I thought I would live the rest of my life in peace, building my empire, never having to look at their arrogant faces again. But the universe has a very dark sense of humor. Because exactly 7 days later, the past didn't just knock on my door. It broke it down. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing a massive acquisition deal we were about to close. My private, unlisted work phone. The one only my top executives and bank managers had the number to, suddenly started ringing. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But expecting an important call from a bank associate, I picked it up. Sarah? The voice on the other end hit me like a physical punch to the gut. It was my mother. My brain completely froze. How did she get this number? This was a highly classified corporate line. But before I could ask, the sheer panic in her voice stopped me. Sarah, please, please don't hang up, my mother pleaded. She wasn't using her cold, arrogant Gala voice. She was hyperventilating. She sounded like she was crying. I sat back in my leather chair, completely silent. I didn't hang up, but I didn't say a word. Sarah, we need your help, my mother sobbed into the phone. The bank just called. They gave us 72 hours. If we don't pay them $500,000 by Friday, they are going to freeze all the charity accounts. They are going to audit the foundation. We are going to lose absolutely everything. Please, Sarah, we're your family. I stared at the phone in my hand. Exactly 1 week ago, this woman stood in front of 300 people and told security to throw me out like trash. She told the world I wasn't her daughter. And now, she was begging me for $500,000. I didn't know it yet, but my mother's desperate phone call was about to unlock the darkest, most pathetic secret my family had been hiding for years. And it was going to lead to the most satisfying revenge of my entire life. I held the phone to my ear, listening to my mother hyperventilate on the other end of the line. Sarah? Are you there? Please, say something, she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. Let me ask you something. When someone who completely destroyed you suddenly comes crawling back on their knees, begging for your help, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? Do you feel sorry for them? Do you feel a sense of twisted satisfaction? I didn't feel either of those things. I just felt a cold, calculating curiosity. How did you get this number? I asked. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. There was a slight pause on the other end, followed by a shaky breath. I hired a private investigator, my mother confessed, sounding pathetic. We tracked down your corporate registry. Sarah, we didn't know you owned an equity firm. We had no idea you had this kind of capital. You have to help us. The bank is going to destroy the foundation. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my mahogany desk. The sheer hypocrisy of this woman was almost fascinating to listen to. Wait, I interrupted, my tone sharp and chillingly calm. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. 7 days ago, you stood on a stage in front of 300 people and told security to physically drag me out of a ballroom. You explicitly said I was not entitled to use the Carter family name and that I was no longer part of your family. Do you remember that, Mother? She started to cry harder. Real, ugly, panicked tears. Sarah, I was angry. You know how your father is? He pressured me into doing it to protect our image. I made a mistake. People say things they don't mean when emotions are high. You didn't say it in private, I replied, my voice dropping to a whisper. You said it into a microphone. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do whatever you want, she pleaded. But please, you have to wire the $500,000 to the foundation's account by Friday. If the bank initiates a forensic audit on Monday, your father and I are going to face criminal charges. I froze. Criminal charges? The Carter Foundation for the Underprivileged was a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization. It was supposedly dedicated to helping homeless shelters and struggling families. Why would an audit of a charity organization lead to my parents facing criminal charges? My mind started putting the puzzle pieces together at lightning speed. My father's forced laughter at the gala. My mother's panicked glances at her phone. The sheer desperation to raise money from donors. Mom, I said slowly, my eyes narrowing at the phone. What exactly did you and Dad do with the charity's money? The line went completely silent. The only sound was my mother's heavy, erratic breathing. Tell me, I demanded, my voice turning into a bark of absolute authority. Or I hang up this phone and you can deal with the FBI on Monday. We borrowed it, she finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. You borrowed it? I repeated, my blood running cold. Your father's real estate investments took a massive hit last year, she confessed, crying uncontrollably now. We were going to lose the house. We were going to lose the country club memberships. We couldn't let people know we were failing. So, your father quietly transferred funds from the charity's donation pool into our personal accounts to cover the real estate margins. We were going to put it back. I swear, Sarah, we were going to replace every single dollar after the gala. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just arrogant, toxic parents. They were corporate thieves. They had literally stolen $500,000 of donation money. Money meant for starving families, just so they could keep wearing designer clothes and drinking champagne with their rich friends. And when the gala didn't raise enough money to cover the hole they had dug, the bank flagged the missing funds. They were cornered rats, completely out of options. You have the money, Sarah. We know you do, my mother cried. You can write this off as a corporate donation. You can save us. We are still your family. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I thought about the security guards grabbing my arms. I thought about the 11-hour flight where I cried until I couldn't breathe. I will transfer the $500,000, I said calmly. My mother let out a massive, shuddering gasp of relief. Oh my God. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. You don't know what this means. We promise we will pay you back. You are saving our lives. But I am not wiring it to the foundation's account, I continued, cutting off her celebration. The line went quiet. What? What do you mean? She asked nervously. I am not making a blind transfer, Mom. This is a business transaction, I said, my voice dripping with ice. If you want the money, you, Dad, and Jessica will come to my office here in Chicago tomorrow at 10 a.m. We will sit down in my boardroom, and you will sign the official loan agreements in front of my corporate lawyers. If you are not sitting in my building by 10 a.m. tomorrow, the deal is off, and you can enjoy federal prison. I didn't wait for her to answer. I hung up the phone. I set the phone down on my desk, leaned back in my chair, and let out a long, slow breath. My mother thought I had just agreed to save them. She thought the black sheep of the family was finally bowing down and doing her duty to protect the prestigious Carter name. But she didn't know the terrifying truth. She didn't know that my firm had recently acquired a massive portfolio of distressed assets from the exact same regional bank that handled their charity accounts. I didn't just have $500,000 to lend them. I already owned their toxic debt. I owned the mortgage to their mansion. I literally owned their entire financial existence. And tomorrow morning, when they walked into my boardroom expecting a blank check, I was going to hand them the final nail in their coffin. Let me tell you something about truly arrogant people. Even when they are standing on the edge of a cliff, completely bankrupt and days away from going to federal prison, they still believe they are better than you. They physically cannot turn off their egos. The next morning, at exactly 9:55 a.m., the receptionist at my corporate headquarters called my office to let me know my guests had arrived. I didn't rush out to greet them. I let them wait. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, stood by the window overlooking the city, and let them sit in the waiting area for 15 agonizing minutes. When you hold all the power, you set the clock. Finally, I picked up my phone and told my assistant to escort them into the main executive boardroom. I walked down the glass corridor, my high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the boardroom and stepped inside. There they were, my father, my mother, and my older sister, Jessica. Watching them sitting in my building was a surreal experience. This wasn't a charity gala. There were no chandeliers, no champagne, no rich donors for them to impress. This was my territory. My father was wearing an expensive, tailored suit, trying to look like a powerful CEO. My mother was clutching a designer handbag tightly in her lap. But despite their expensive clothes, they looked terrified. The dark circles under my father's eyes told me he hadn't slept in days. When I walked in, none of them stood up to hug me. There were no apologies. My father just cleared his throat and tried to take control of the room immediately. "Sarah," my father said, his voice deep and authoritative, as if he was the one doing me a favor. "I'm glad you finally came to your senses. Your mother tells me you've agreed to write the check. Have your lawyers bring in the transfer documents so we can get this over with. We have a flight back this afternoon." I stopped at the head of the long mahogany table. I didn't sit down. I just stared at him. The sheer audacity of this man. 8 days ago, he stood behind my mother and watched security drag me out of his party. Today, he was demanding a $500,000 bailout from me like he was ordering a cup of coffee. I placed my hands flat on the polished table and leaned forward. "I didn't agree to write you a check, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I agreed to hear your terms for a corporate loan. And since you are the one begging for my money to keep you out of federal prison, I suggest you change your tone." My father's face turned bright red. He wasn't used to anyone talking to him like that, let alone the daughter he considered a failure. He opened his mouth to yell, but my mother quickly grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with panic. "Richard, please!" she hissed at him. She looked back at me, forcing that same pathetic, fake, trembling smile she used on the phone. "Sarah, darling, please don't be like this. We are under an incredible amount of stress. We just need the $500,000 transferred to the foundation's account by tomorrow. We promise we will pay you back with interest as soon as the real estate market bounces back." "You don't have the capacity to pay me back," I replied coldly, opening a thick leather folder that was resting on the table. "My financial analysts ran a background check on your assets last night. Your real estate firm is drowning in debt. Your mansion is heavily mortgaged. You have literally zero liquid cash. If I give you this money, it's not a loan. It's a donation to save criminals." Jessica, who had been sitting quietly with her arms crossed, suddenly slammed her hands on the table. "You arrogant little brat!" my sister snapped, her face twisting with pure hatred. "You think just because you have a fancy office you can talk to us like this? Mom and Dad gave you everything growing up. They put a roof over your head. You owe this family. Stop playing these stupid power games and just give us the money." I slowly turned my head and looked at Jessica. "I owe this family?" I repeated softly. I walked around the table, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room until I was standing directly behind my sister's chair. "Do I owe this family for the night you all stood and laughed while security threw me out into the street?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper right next to her ear. "Do I owe this family for the 5 years you spent pretending I was dead? You didn't come here today because you love me, Jessica. You came here because without Dad's stolen charity money, your wealthy husband is going to realize you are completely broke. Jessica's face went completely pale. She shrank back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down in the CEO chair. I looked at the three of them. They were broken, cornered, and entirely at my mercy. I will give you the $500,000 to replace the stolen charity funds, I said clearly. It will stop the bank's forensic audit, and it will keep the FBI away from your door. My father let out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief. My mother closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated the black sheep one last time. But, I continued, raising a single finger, I am not writing a check. I am presenting you with a contract, and my terms are non-negotiable. My father frowned. What terms? I pushed 3 copies of a legal document across the table. First, I said, you and Mom will immediately resign from the Carter Foundation's board of directors. You will sign over 100% of the voting rights and executive control of the charity to my firm. What? My mother gasped, standing up. Sarah, no! That charity is our entire social reputation. If we step down, the whole city will know something is wrong. We will be ruined in our social circles. You are already ruined, Mom. You just don't know it yet, I replied coldly. Second term, you will publicly release your personal financial records from the last 3 years to the foundation's top donors, proving exactly where the money went and how you mismanaged it. My father slammed his fist on the table, his eyes burning with absolute fury. I will never sign that, he roared. You are trying to publicly humiliate us. You are trying to destroy the Carter name. We came here for a loan, not to hand you our entire legacy on a silver platter. I am your father, and you will give me that money right now. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him with absolute, dead-eyed certainty. You're right, Dad, I whispered. I am trying to destroy the Carter name. But you're wrong about one thing. You don't actually have a choice. And then I pulled out the final document, the one that was going to permanently end their resistance. Because there is a massive secret you three don't know, I said, placing the document gently on the table. And when you read this, you will realize that you don't just owe the bank money anymore. You owe me. I placed the final document onto the center of the mahogany table. It was a thick, officially stamped legal file from one of the largest commercial banks in the country. My father stared at it. His chest was heaving with anger, but I could see the sudden hesitation in his eyes. He slowly reached out, grabbed the file, and opened it. I watched him read the first page. I watched as his eyes scanned the legal jargon, the financial routing numbers, and the official bank signatures. And then, I watched the exact moment his brain finally processed what he was holding. The color completely drained from my father's face. He looked like he had just been physically struck by a train. His hands started to tremble so violently that the papers rattled against the table. What is this? My father whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched gasp. Sarah, how do you have this? My mother immediately leaned over to look at the papers. Richard? What's wrong? What does it say? I'll tell you what it says, Mom, I said, leaning back in my CEO chair, feeling a profound, chilling sense of peace. 3 days ago, the regional bank that holds the mortgage on your mansion, the loans for your failing real estate business, and the accounts for the Carter Foundation decided they were tired of dealing with your toxic debt. I paused, letting the silence wrap around them like a chain. Banks don't like losing money, I continued smoothly. So, when a client is about to go bankrupt and face federal fraud charges, the bank sells that client's debt to a private equity firm for a fraction of the cost, just to get it off their books. I pointed a single finger at the document in my father's trembling hands. You didn't do your research before you came here today to beg for $500,000. If you had, you would have realized that my firm specializes in acquiring distressed assets. 3 days ago, my company bought your debt from the bank. Jessica let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. My mother looked like she was about to faint. "You don't owe the bank anymore, Dad," I whispered, staring dead into his terrified eyes. "I own your loans. I own the mortgage to the mansion you sleep in. I legally own the financial rights to the Carter Foundation. I don't just have the $500,000 you need. I hold the absolute deed to your entire life. If I had detonated a bomb inside that boardroom, the devastation would have been less severe." My arrogant, powerful father. The man who had spent my entire life making me feel like a worthless disappointment, suddenly looked incredibly small. The realization hit him that he wasn't negotiating with his naive daughter anymore. He was negotiating with the woman who could legally throw him out onto the streets with a single phone call. "Sarah, please," my mother suddenly wailed, completely dropping her wealthy, sophisticated persona. She was full-on, ugly crying, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She practically fell out of her chair, rushing over to my side of the table. "Please, Sarah, I am begging you. You can't do this to us. We are your parents. If you force us to resign and publicly release our records, we will be destroyed. We will lose all our friends. The donors will sue us. Please, just forgive us for what happened at the gala. We were wrong. Just give us the money and let us keep the charity." Let me ask you something. When a toxic person apologizes, do they ever actually apologize for the pain they caused you? Or do they just apologize because they got caught? I looked down at my mother. I remembered the 11-hour flight. I remembered the security guards dragging me out while she smiled at the crowd. "You didn't need a daughter, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You needed an ATM. You didn't invite me to that gala to welcome me back into the family. You invited me so you could publicly humiliate me, hoping it would prove your superiority to your wealthy friends. But when those same friends turned their backs on you, you came crawling to the daughter you threw away." I stood up from my chair. I looked at the three of them, broken, desperate, and finally stripped of their fake prestige. "You have exactly 60 seconds to sign the contract I gave you," I said, tapping my finger on the table. "Sign over the foundation. Agree to the public release of your financial crimes. Do it, and I will wire the $500,000 to cover the stolen funds and keep you out of federal prison." My father looked up at me, a single tear escaping his eye. "And if we don't?" he whispered. "If you don't," I replied, my voice hard as steel, "I will call my lawyers right now. I will initiate the foreclosure on your mansion by this afternoon, and on Monday morning, I will personally hand over your fabricated financial records to the FBI." I pulled a sleek, silver pen from my blazer pocket and tossed it onto the contract in front of my father. "The clock is ticking, Dad. Sign it." The silence was agonizing. The only sound was my mother sobbing into her hands and Jessica hyperventilating in the corner. My father looked at the pen. He looked at the contract that would publicly humiliate him, strip him of his beloved social status, and expose him as a thief to the entire city. But he knew he had absolutely no choice. With shaking hands, my father picked up the pen. He didn't say another word. He just lowered his head, signed his name on the dotted line, and pushed the papers back across the table. My mother shakily signed it right after him. They had surrendered everything: their pride, their charity, their social standing, and their control over me. I picked up the signed contract. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. When you finally cut the cancer out of your life, you don't celebrate. You just feel a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. "The money will be transferred to the foundation's account within the hour," I said softly. "Your legal team will receive the eviction notice for the foundation's headquarters by tomorrow. We are done here." I turned my back on them and walked toward the boardroom doors. "Sarah," my father called out behind me, his voice cracking. You completely destroyed us." I stopped with my hand on the door handle. I didn't turn around to look at him. "No, Dad," I whispered into the quiet room. "You destroyed yourselves. I just gave you the receipt." I pushed the door open and walked out, leaving them alone with the ruins of their fake empire. 3 months. That's how long it took my team of forensic accountants to clean up the absolute disaster my parents had left behind. We stripped the charity down to its studs. We removed my parents from every legal document, sold off their lavish headquarters, and completely rebranded the organization. I took my family's name off the building forever. And last night, we held the first annual gala under my new ownership. If you had walked into that ballroom, you wouldn't have recognized it. There were no towering crystal chandeliers. There were no $3,000 designer gowns, and there were certainly no politicians shaking hands for photo ops. Instead, the room was filled with real people. Social workers, community leaders, and the families who were actually receiving the funding. For the first time in its history, the charity wasn't about feeding rich people's egos. It was actually about helping people. When the lights dimmed, I didn't wait for an introduction. I just walked straight up to the center stage and took the microphone. The crowd went silent. I looked out into the audience, smiling at the faces of the people we had helped. But then, my eyes drifted to the very back of the room. Standing near the exit doors, partially hidden in the shadows, was a woman. It was my mother. She looked completely different. The arrogance was gone. The expensive diamond jewelry was missing. She just looked old and incredibly tired. I didn't panic. I didn't freeze like I did 3 months ago. I just looked directly into her eyes from the stage, and I spoke into the microphone. For years, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the room. This organization was run by people who cared more about their reputation than their responsibility. They believed that having a powerful family name made them untouchable. But I am here to tell you tonight, a family name means absolutely nothing if the people carrying it have no integrity. I saw my mother lower her head. Tonight is about a new legacy, I continued. One built on truth, not titles. The crowd erupted into applause. It was the loudest, most genuine applause I had ever heard. After the speech, as the guests were eating and talking, I slipped out into the quiet hotel lobby to get some fresh air. I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned around. My mother was standing there. She was clutching her purse tightly with both hands. She couldn't even look me in the eye. We stood there in silence for a long time. The last time we were in a hotel lobby together, she had ordered security to drag me out into the street. We had to sell the house, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Your father. His friends won't even return his calls anymore. Jessica's husband filed for divorce when he found out about the money. I just looked at her. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt completely empty toward her. I was wrong, Sarah, she said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I was so wrong about you. She looked up at me, waiting for me to hug her, waiting for me to say it was okay, waiting for the little girl who used to beg for her love to come rushing back. But that little girl was gone. I took a step closer to her. I looked directly into her tear-filled eyes, and I delivered the final words she would ever hear from me. You weren't wrong about me, Mom, I said softly, but with a coldness that cut straight to her bone. You were wrong about what I would become without you. Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to find them. I turned my back on her and walked away. I walked back into the bright, warm ballroom, leaving her standing entirely alone in the cold lobby. For years, my family had told me I wasn't worthy of their name. They told me I was a failure. Exactly 1 week after they threw me out in front of 300 people, they came crawling back, begging me to save everything that name had built. But I didn't save their reputation. I saved the people their reputation had hurt. Sometimes, the universe breaks your heart just to protect your soul. Walking away from the people who share your blood is the hardest thing you will ever do. But sometimes, it is the only way you will ever survive. If you've made it this far into the story, I want to say a massive thank you. You stood by me through the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the final revenge. If you loved this story, please hit that like button. It helps me more than you know. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. And before you go, tell me in the comments, do you think I went too far, or did my family get exactly what they deserved? Thank you for listening. Stay strong, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next video.